Well, power to the people.
Fuck you.
Black British identity is something that people outside the UK tend to scoff at. Not just because of American exceptionalism, but you're black, but like, not really black. Your accent is the social identifier that your struggles don't mean anything. It's a really interesting dilemma to deal with. Let's talk about it. When discussing Black British identity, the first thing I want to bring to the table is perspective. The perspective of those outside the UK and those within it. Outside the UK, black people with British accents are commonly viewed as not that black. It's something I've dealt with, and it bleeds into two things. One, accent being used as a social identifier, and two, American exceptionalism. It's a bit more complicated than that, but I'll get into it later. To explain the former, you need to understand how accent is generally used as a class divider. To give an example, think of the stupidest accent you can think of right now. You done? Alright. The problem is accents tend to come with ideas and intelligence levels associated with them. There's a currency tied to your accent because it ties into where you're from and subconsciously how people perceive your intellect. Now, from an outsider perspective, a British accent is proper. It's really formal. It implies intelligence, that I really know what I'm talking about. I hate to be the one. But what's fascinating is how that same accent wouldn't inspire the same reaction within the UK. This is what I mean by perspective. When you use an accent as an identifier of someone's social standing, it can be really dangerous. I was in a conversation with a friend about NSARS, and he brought up this experience he had in a taxi in Nigeria. The taxi driver turned to him because the police showed up with guns, and he said, "Don't talk. Once they hear your accent, they're gonna try and run you for all your money." I think it's this dichotomy of blackness I find most interesting about Black British identity. You're black enough to be treated like shit, but your accent implies that you've been alleviated of any struggle or hardship attached to your race. Low key, they look at you the way they should be looking at black billionaires. It's an interesting game. They haven't gone through anything. They haven't gone through what black Americans have gone through. And to be specific, they have little to no black history. It's interesting.
So hard to choose. My love to you.
This dichotomy that comes with Black British identity is very clear. You can either choose to embrace your blackness overtly, or assimilate yourself by blending in. It should be noted that specifically London is a fairly multicultural area, and while there are class divisions with significantly more white people than black people, to argue it's as bad as the US with redlining and so on and so forth, it would be ridiculous. That's not really the point I'm trying to make. It's there in places, but that's not the point I'm trying to make. More on that later. The same can't be said for the media we consume. The media in the UK is very Eurocentric. Some would say that's to be expected, but it's almost striking to a degree. I remember growing up and seeing people talk about all these different shows. EastEnders was a big one. And I watch a few episodes and go, yeah, I can't relate to any of this. To be blunt, it was just white people and their problems. How many Black British TV shows can you think of? Name 5. Actually, don't do that because you don't need to. Because I already know the answer. You want to know why? You want to know why I know? Because there's only 11. And there's only one Black British cartoon. Like, this is... Ooh. Now, why is this relevant? It's relevant for 2 reasons. One, there's a significantly large amount of self-hate in the UK.
And let this be yet another reminder that no matter how much money you got, you still just a nigger.
While there are people in touch with their traditional heritage with Afrobeats and so on and so forth, more often than not, the black people you meet are systematically conditioned to act in accordance to Eurocentric standards. It's changing your accent to sound more proper on the phone. It's the self-hating shadism.
That's not proper English. Robert, I'm disappointed in you. I thought you belonged here. I thought you were refined. But
and I think more relevantly, it's the colorism. One of the biggest forms of racism present in the UK is colorism. It's the most normalized form of racism I noticed while growing up. There are 2 strong memories I have growing up that always stuck with me, and they tend to be my go-to examples for this sort of thing. I used to like this white girl, I know. And one day she was finally asked, "Hey, would you ever go out with David?" And she responded, "No, David's too dark." And naturally, I went home and cried. And I yelled out, "I wish I was a white person." Unprompted. I didn't know anything about race, but I still said it, and it's very interesting. And I went to secondary school, and there was already this really big culture around, dark-skinned people being ugly. One time I was ignoring this girl with a friend, and she yells out, "You're not light-skinned, nigga, act your skin color." These are very overt examples, but I'd argue the fact that they're so on the nose is very telling. I would argue that black women get the worst of it too. The sheer amount of black people I know that communicate they don't like black women is it's a bit, yeah, it's kind of ridiculous. It's all the same tired reasons too. Too ratchet, I'm afraid, too angry. The correlation is very fascinating. Now, am I arguing that my individual experience is representative of the entire black British populace? No, and it'd be ridiculous for me to argue that we're all just secretly Uncle Ruckus. As a matter of fact, it's this reduction of our identity that serves to bolster many ignorant American perceptions of blackness outside the UK. Which feeds into my next point. A majority of black media that black people consume from the UK is from the US. You shouldn't even need to ask why. 11 shows and 1 cartoon. And it came out in 2020. Let's go back to EastEnders. It has 33 seasons. It's like it's like the Simpsons of the UK. Actually, no, maybe that's not the best example. And believe it or not, this predominantly white show with a racist history, they had an all-black EastEnders episode once. I think it was in 2009. And you know what happened? They received 250 complaints. And over a fifth of those complaints were before the episode even aired. A Tory MP, David DeVries, I hope I'm saying that right, said it didn't give a balanced view on race issues. He said, there's a danger in winding up non-black people. Wow, shit, really interesting. Now, interestingly, what the episode was exploring was how in the 1950s, there was a campaign called Keep Britain White, which is a very real thing that actually happened. This is completely off script too, but while I'm recording this video, on New Year's Day, they put up a Black Panther fist for New Year's, and the BBC was trending because people didn't like that BLM was talked about on UK TV. Wild shit. I know, really interesting. It's nigh impossible to relate to the media the UK puts out because it's so ridiculously focused on the white working class. And I'm not even saying that white working class people haven't gone through shit, because they absolutely have. But it's this weird sense of racial nationalism. Black people are continually made absent or relegated to side positions within them. It was only when I watched shows like My Wife and Kids or Everybody Hates Chris where I actually felt like there was something out there for me to relate to. I distinctly remember an experience going, oh, his dad's about to beat him. That happens to me. Look, it's not positive, but the point I'm trying to communicate is those of us that didn't identify with the white working class experience had nothing but media from the US to consume. And it was shows like that which I felt genuinely gave an accurate depiction of what it felt like to grow up black, in a black household. So to be constantly told you don't understand what it means to be black, you don't experience racism, you ain't built like us, is not only condescending, but it shows a level of ignorance to not only how Eurocentrism operates in the UK, but the negative effect it actually has on black people.
You've seen the foundation, holding up a ragged nation. You know it in your mind, what it's like and how it lies.
Britain has a very weird relationship with race, in the sense that it doesn't educate anybody about anything. I specifically remember being given a worksheet in history. It was a Venn diagram about all the things that Britain brought to different countries like Africa. First off, Africa isn't a country, but you know what I mean. Back then, I didn't have a brain cell, so I didn't really deep it. But now I have one singular brain cell, and yeah, no, it was pretty fucked up. But I'd argue it's actually pretty in line with what we do. Specifically with Boris. There's this really strong exoticization of the British Empire and colonization. This unhinged desire to go back. It almost reminds me of... It's why the blatant British nationalism on display with things like Brexit is really frustrating. We have to ask ourselves, what historically has British nationalism actually produced? The White Defence League. They partnered up with the Labour National Party to host a protest called Stop the Coloured Invasion. And eventually they would partner up and form the British National Party. BNP. Very interesting. The Windrush scandal was one of the more notable forms of racism seen in the UK. Black people who lived in the country for decades are now getting their citizenship retroactively revoked. Why? Well, let's look at the actual 1962 Commonwealth Immigration Act. Its great merit is that it can be presented as non-discriminatory, even though in practice, its restrictive effect is intended to, and would in fact, operate on coloured people almost exclusively. Rab Butler said this, Home Secretary, and it was a private statement. And this is a very general point, but the government knows the genuine impact of the things they do, quite directly, but clearly they don't care and still push for the same results. Home Secretaries in the UK are very interesting. Priti Patel, I hope I'm saying that right, or maybe I don't really care. This is the current one, by the way. She's the current Home Secretary. She's quoted saying, "I want would-be criminals to feel..." Hang on. Okay, so prior to making this video, I was under the impression that black people were 4 times more likely to be stopped by the police. After Boris and Priti Patel came through with their changes, Now it's 9 times more likely. And you know what? I believe it because it recently happened to me again. So again, interesting. The link between black people and criminality is something that's been discussed to death in several spaces. Foucault writes of social fear and policing that is reflected in binary division and branding, which produces the polarized social identities of mad and sane, dangerous and harmless, normal and abnormal. This cohesive assessment of labeling, categorizing, and identifying places the individual under constant surveillance. Foucault, however, makes no mention of sexual and racial binary oppositions to designate social inferiority and deviancy as biologically inscribed in the bodies of non-males or non-whites. Racial and sexual issues are evaded. The plague of criminality, deviancy, immorality, and corruption is embodied on black because both sexual and social pathology are branded by skin color, as well as gender and sexual orientation. The language used to describe black people in the media here is absolutely no different.
Because this is what happens when you have a stigmatory language. So the last time I got pulled over to tail in the two, it was a week, literally a week. It was so ironic. After the commissioner of the Met went on TV and said, tougher sentences for teenage thugs, and black men in London are 20 times more likely to be killed, which is a very selective way of presenting the information. If you're saying blackness is the common denominator, the way to present the information would be to say, what percentage of black people actually kill people? And as I just showed you with the stats earlier, when you present it like that, you realize that the percentage of black people that actually kill people is significantly less than 1%, which means you're going to have to offer more of a common denominator than blackness. But when you present blackness as the common denominator, even when a significant portion of the black on black violence stats are people like me who are half white, you get a situation where police can pull over a grown man and he's 34 years old and say, gang members drive cars like this. And I'm like, well, so do people who run companies, which happens to be what I am. I'm actually on my way to a meeting, but thank you very much. I'm sure that it was the car that made you think I was a gang member.
Institutional racism is rampant. Black people with the same grades as their contemporaries won't be allowed into top schools. Black people are more likely to be expelled. I know this because, again, it happened to me. Got into an argument with a white kid. He punched me in the face. I punched him back harder. I got sent to the head of year and he says, I'm getting excluded. The white kid didn't get excluded. Why? I'm told, well, David, you know, it's different when you do it. Never got an explanation. Instead, I got kicked out for 2 days.
I changed my mind, Granddad. Pick jail, pick jail, pick jail, pick jail. Please let me go to jail.
And as for you Negroes, well, this just gonna be like a trip to the future. So it should be exciting for everybody. Come on aboard.
The 13,000 young people excluded from school each year might as well be given a date in which to join the prison service at some point later down the line. The clear message of the literature is that, to a significant extent, the exclusion gap is caused by a largely unwitting but systematic racial discrimination in the application of disciplinary and exclusion policies. Eurocentrism and racial bias project itself throughout this country, and it's partially because it's convinced itself it's beyond race, it's beyond those issues. White supremacy was the mainstream content, it was legal, it was political, and really it wasn't challenged that prominently until the latter half of the 20th century. Really not that long ago. Andrew Shabitsky was Boris's former advisor, just 10 months ago. Alright, cool. Let's see some things he said. There are excellent reasons to think there are very real racial differences in intelligence, and that they're significantly, and even mostly generic in origin, though the degree to which is obviously a very serious subject. That debate busily bustles on, okay, who's speaking like, nigga, who really speaks like this? Okay, and I'm sure we'll have more precise answers in another 5 years or so. Though whether the politicians will pay any attention is debatable. It would be nice if they did from the standpoint of immigration control, in the UK that is. But for the black American heads, don't worry, I got your bases covered. Let's go. If the mean black American IQ is around 85, that's comparable to the mean white American IQ of 100, you'll see a far greater percentage of blacks than whites in the range of IQs of 75 or below, at which we are close to the typical boundary of mild mental... Yeah, I ain't gonna say that. I don't really think I'm ready to say that. You're starting to get the idea. Typically, criminals with IQs below 70 cannot be executed in the US. Typically, criminals with IQs below 70 cannot be executed in the USA. I believe... Yeah, no. Yeah, I'm not... You get the idea. It's dumb. It's dumb, right? Okay, cool. So for those who don't know, generic IQ statistics were largely used as a tool by European scholars. The racist ones. Well... Most of them were racist, but you get the point. Largely as a means of scientific racism. We can talk about Negroes and Hamites, but we can also talk about how this intersects into class. This is a fairly common fascist rhetoric and is used to undermine black intelligence, and historically, to justify discrimination. This interesting dichotomy once again comes into play. Again, despite scientific racism and black children performing exceptionally well, despite the socioeconomic circumstances, there is once again this very strong pushback against the idea of immigrants performing better than white children in school. Black intelligence is undermined constantly on a systematic and institutional level. This very blatant disrespect. Here's a story. Here's another story. I'm telling a bunch of stories today. Here's a story. I chose to do my English language coursework on the N-word. Fun fact, the media I based it's a fun fact. The media I based my essay on was the Boondocks, specifically the S-word episode. Nigga, you don't understand how much I enjoyed the show. I really liked the show. And my white English teacher loved it to bits. She really loved the S-word. She loved the episode. But she kept pushing for me to write the essay on why everyone should be allowed to say the N-word. And while I can get into my own criticisms of the S-word another day, she kept implying that if I didn't, my grade would lower for not being more balanced in my discussion. I distinctly remember after all this was said and done, she sent me that Jonah Lucas track, I'm Not Racist, to get me to reconsider. Like, do you know how stupid and ignorant? Like, it's insane, right? It's insane. But all of this is institutionalized stuff, and it bleeds into the ignorance of Britain to race issues and their sensitivity, or lack thereof, towards them. Bringing up the British Empire and its inception isn't something I do for fun, but it's because its legacy has heavily shaped the world we live in today. And while it plays second fiddle to the American Empire, that's not a comparison we should strive for or really be remotely proud of. You'll constantly hear these ideas being suppressed too. The government will communicate to you countless times that it's actually really diverse here. Black kids are doing really well. As a matter of fact, we did it. We're doing a bang up job. That's how they word it. We're doing a bang up job.
And I'm also proud, Mr. Speaker, to say that under this government, we have the most diverse cabinet in the history of this country. And we truly reflect modern Britain.
Discrimination against racism in our society, and I think this is a country that has made huge progress in tackling racism. And we should look sometimes at the positive stuff. We've got more young black and minority ethnic kids going to university than ever before, more black kids doing the toughest subjects in school, doing better than ever before in school. We don't hear enough of this positive stuff. And what makes me sad about what's happening today is that you've got a situation in which the statue of Winston Churchill, who is a national hero, has had to be boarded up for fear of violent attack. And that, to me, is both absurd and wrong. So unfortunately, my message to everybody is that for all sorts of reasons, they should not go to these demonstrations. And whatever our feelings about the cause, we should not support a demonstration that is in all probability, looking at what's happened before, going to end in deliberate and calculated violence. So
this very weird saviour complex that bleeds its way into how history is told regarding slavery. We're told about Britain being one of the first to abolish slavery. But how true is that? They undermined the Haitian Revolution. They helped France undermine rebellions when European powers had already understood and accepted, at least to some degree, that this shit wouldn't fly. Again, they would tell you about these things, but when you can cleverly create propaganda surrounding how great and progressive Britain is, all while exoticizing this racist colonial history, you can get a lot done, believe it or not. You can hide a lot of shit. It's wild. It's wild. You'll see Boris praising Winston Churchill like he's Jesus, talking about BLM protesters and how they shouldn't take down statues. But Winston Churchill was notoriously racist, and they still exoticize him. A big amount of these people are, but they still exoticize these people. They still exoticize colonialism for doing something right. It's really interesting. Once again, if you were to ask these people to apply the same semblance of nuance to the BLM protesters, to Che Guevara, to black kids down in the South, they won't do it. And the answer to why is obvious. Eurocentrism. It's a plague on Britain, much like the ruins of the empire that it's feverishly trying to cling back to. British identity, despite the liberal rhetoric to the contrary, is obviously seen as synonymous with whiteness. Modern British identity grew with and was shaped by fundamentally and undeniably a racist British Empire. You know what's wild? It's like you would assume people would talk about this. Like you would assume people in and outside the UK would care, but they don't. It's isolating, it's lonely, and it creates an identity of invisibility. This invisibility is both present here and, well, we'll get to it. BAME is a term used to describe everyone who isn't white in the UK, or everyone who isn't white in Britain. It's a catch-all term for minorities. Okay, but what's the issue with this? The fact that there's solidarity between ethnic minorities is a good thing. How is this problematic? Well, let's look at an example of a charity rebranding during the BLM craze. Originally, this charity was called Newman Asians Women Project. Now, it's called London Black Women's Project. Despite this, an overwhelming majority of the funds still go towards Asian people. I'm not even saying there's something wrong with this. They do a lot of funding for domestic violence, and I understand it isn't easy. My problem is this inherent blanket term BAME is used to generalize any issue that doesn't include white people. It creates a situation where black voices are still silenced by virtue of being grouped with other issues. It's not solidarity if not everybody gets a voice. I covered black solidarity a bit in my last video, but one of the biggest things stopping black solidarity is American exceptionalism. Something popularized by Ronald Reagan. American exceptionalism is the view of the United States of America that the country sees its history as inherently different from other nations. It's essentially this narrative that America has a unique set of circumstances that no one else has ever gone through or could ever remotely understand. I sympathize with the sentiment. I think it's ridiculous to reduce every issue disenfranchised black people go through as being completely the same. It's disingenuous and it paints a picture of black people being a monolith. But it goes back to that point. There's a stigma around black British identity. It's like, you're black, but no. 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 Again, accent is a social identifier. So they don't actually think you've gone through anything. It's just tea and crumpet jokes. And it took me a while to come to terms with the fact that this kind of made me really uncomfortable. Imagine, this is an example, right? Hear me out. Okay. Imagine if every time I spoke to a black American, I put on a cowboy hat and said, look at me, I'm an American. It would be so tone deaf and unfunny. Call it a hunch, but unless you're Stephen A. Smith or Lil Nas X, you're not really wearing a cowboy hat, are you? Like, I don't think you're wearing cowboy hat. I don't think most people wear cowboy hats. The hell? But because blackness is so framed around the black American experience, all other black people are just black people with crumpets, black people with kangaroos, black people in football. Black American is the default idea of blackness. And again, let's go back to the institutions like education. The only black thing I learned in history were about black Americans. MLK the Dreamer, Malcolm X the Violent One, Rosa Parks is here. Okay, goodbye. The education curriculum doesn't tell you about black history. It instead vaguely tells you about black individuals in a vacuum. Almost out of this weird sense of obligation, the curriculum seems more interested in making Britain's history sound fun and exciting as opposed to being honest. There's a song I distinctly remember, and I'll sing it because, you know, it's important. Henry VIII, he had 6 wives. All of them lived in fear of their lives. 2 were beheaded and 1 of them died. 2 were divorced and 1 survived. Now you're probably thinking, what kind of fucked up song is that? But this is the shit they had me singing when I was 8. It's a strong memory. All that black stuff is over in the States. They ain't here. We don't worry about it. Let's keep singing songs about Henry VIII. Yeah, it's gonna be fun. Britain ended slavery. We're good, even though they didn't do that. Even though Britain tried to undermine the rebellions. Even though there's all these abolitionists, even though there's all this stuff, it doesn't exist. The history is just not there. It's fascinating to me. And it has a residual effect on how black people from different environments perceive themselves. It creates issues with self-worth. I was in a call the other day. I was talking about knife crime in the UK. It's a really big thing. And the person I was talking to laughed and said, me, we're just built different. Nigga try to stab me, see what happens. Like, okay, you don't even care. You don't care that black people are dying in other places. You don't care that black people are harassed by police in the UK. You don't care about Blanco Mentor. You don't care about like the lost history. You don't care about colorism. You don't even care about the black issues. You're more concerned with power scaling black struggle. And that's what I find really disgusting about it. You can't take pride in being black because you're not seen as conventionally black enough. You can't take pride in being British because of the racist history of the empire. You're not accepted in these spaces. There's nothing for you on TV. There's nothing for you in the history books because it's buried and hidden. Your whole identity and how you construct it is invisible to the world because both overtly and covertly, blackness has been relegated to characteristics and ideas. It's frustrating. You have nothing.
I don't have a home to go back to. All I have is my cat.
Oddly enough, something that does give me a little bit of hope is this channel. When I first started making Operation Black Steel, there was a really big distinction made at the beginning where I argued that I was talking about black culture. Obviously, there were some people really opposed to the idea. There's always going to be people that didn't like UK niggas saying anything about the black experience. But for every comment I got like that, there was equally another person who identified with what I was saying. Whether it was Free Huey, Negrosity, Off the Record or whatever, black people across the world understood these things. They understood what it was like to have the government conspire against them. They understood what institutional racism felt like. They understood what it was like to be targeted by the police. They understood what it was like to be assaulted by the police. They understood when I spoke about homophobia in the black community, when I spoke about hypermasculinity. All these things reminded me that white supremacy is global, which isn't positive. I'm not saying that as a positive thing, but I mean more so what that means for black struggles across the globe. It means black liberation is a global struggle. It's exactly how I felt when I identified with these black American shows, because there wasn't any black shows on TV for me.
You're coming from a left-wing angle in your comic strip. What are the chances of you just having your comic strip appear in black-only newspapers and just really show how black you are?
Let's get some response. Well, I'm always one to throw myself into the I'm blacker than you debate. I don't think it gets us anywhere. This is a strip that attempts to do as much of a honest and straightforward racial commentary as it can do within a capitalist corporate American system.
I'm not interested in ranking black issues on a hierarchy because I don't think that's particularly helpful. But seeing black people come together and discuss these issues with respect for each other's experience, fully knowing that we're all suffering under the system of white supremacy, it was really reassuring. Maybe it's not wrong for me to be black and British. Maybe I can still talk about the black experience, my own, and try bring awareness to others. Maybe I can still have self-worth. Maybe I can afford to love myself a bit more. So even if I'm living in the ruins of an empire, even if my own people look down on me for where I come from, knowing that there's people out there that feel the exact way I do, I think I can find peace in that.
I found peace deep inside of me. I decided to let go. Let my heart be my guide and everything.
Yo. Can you guys hear me? All right, cool. Okay, so this is my favorite part of the Free Hueys. This is the best part. You get to plug some black artists and it's really cool. This time, oh man, okay. EYExFOOT or EYExFOOT. I assume it's like Hunter x Hunter, where you're not supposed to say the X. EYEFOOT is so cool. EYEFOOT, first off, I looked at like the cover and I was like, yeah, okay, cover looks really good. But and then I open it and there's gonna be some stickmen. No, this looks really good. It's really impressive. It's more than just the artwork. I really like the writing. Like I really like the way it's been structured. So one of the big things is that like it opens, I'm only gonna talk about the first 10 pages because obviously it's a 50-page thing and I want you guys to buy it. You can buy it on Amazon. And so he's going for an interview for this school. And then, so they're asking him all these questions and they're using it as a tool to communicate what this guy's home life is like. And it's really, like, I'm not gonna lie, this is one of the strongest introductions I've seen, like, to a manga. It's also set in Shibuya, which I thought was really weird. Like, oh man, I love the expressions. Like, I like how also the main character is really relatable. Like, I really like him. Like, a lot of his internal dialogue is really cool. In some places, it feels a bit like, you know what this manga really reminded me of? It's like a comedy sports manga, but like it reminded me of One Punch Man, if anyone's ever seen that. I love that show. He also has this girl that's like he has this white girl. It's very I love it, but I love this show. I love it. It like I read it and I was like, I remember reading it and I went, where's the Netflix adaptation? This is really good. Oh man. See, this is why I like doing like the non-sponsored like plugs, because you can actually speak with a bit more passion about like the material that people are sending you. This is really good, and it's like it's very telling to me how he also has a dog. He wears an MF Doom jumper too. This was even before everything. Shout out MF Doom. This is before everything happened. He's wearing an MF Doom jumper. This is really good. I love it. Some of these jokes I don't want to spoil. That's why I'm only going to talk about the first 10 pages. I like how the girl is trying to sway him to the dark side in this weird way. I like how he's just done with the smart. Like there was this point where he's trying to open the door and the guy's like, "You have to be gentle." He's like, "Oh, nigga, just open the door, man." I really like it. If you want to see Stephen A. Smith in manga form, buy the book. Oh man, there's a joke in here. I'm not gonna spoil it because obviously I'm not gonna spoil the guy's manga. Really good. There's a joke in here where he's trying to play it cool for a girl and is, oh man, I really like it. Buy it on Amazon. Trust me. It's like, if I recommend anything on Amazon, it's going to be EYEFOOT. EYEFOOT is really good. Support the writer. Honestly, this is incredible. Like, and it's by doing this sort of stuff with Free Huey, it just always reminds me that there's so many talented black people out there that people just have no idea about. Like this should be on Netflix. This should be on Netflix. It's so good. Guys, check it out. EYExFOOT is incredible. Shout out to the writer, shout out to the artist, shout out to everyone involved that helped make this. This is really cool. Oh man. Guys, thank you for sticking with me. Thank you for supporting the channel. It means so much. We pray that tomorrow will be better than today. Power to the people. Peace.
Freedom!